full screen. Okay, so for this question, the first thing, oh, hang on. I'm gonna have to get out of that. Do I have a text box here? Okay, so the first thing we need to do, well, actually, let's go back to this slide. So the question is, explain the relationship. Wait, it should be up here. Yeah. So we're up here with this one. So it says, explain the idea of conscience as covered in this unit. Compare and contrast Thomas' understanding of the use of conscience regarding Henry's the Eighth's decision, desire for a divorce with that of Cardinal Wolsey, and provide evidence to support your statements. So with anything, any like essay, we always start with defining our terms. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is define conscience. So conscience is a judgment of reason. Let me get the official definition. Whereby the human person recognizes the moral quality of a concrete act. And that is from the Catechism. It's Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 1778. And I know this is small. Let me try to make it bigger. You'll be able to see it on the notes, though. So, we also watched that little video with Father, I wrote his name down. Where is it? Father Cuddy. He gave us another way to understand conscience. He said that conscience is application of knowledge to a particular act. And both, one thing I left off of this definition is it's prior to the act, during, and after. A lot of times our conscience convicts us after, but with both definitions, we recognize that conscience is a judgment that that happens before, during, and after. So in the example from A Man for All Seasons, Cardinal Wolsey has asked Thomas More to come meet with him because they had a meeting of the King's Council, and More doesn't want to support them in trying to get the annulment from the Pope, at least if the way they do it is through seizing church property. So Wolsey calls More's conscience, More's conscience, he says, why don't you just look at the plain facts? He says, why do you always have to look with that horrible moral squint? And so in saying that, what Wolsey's doing is he's kind of showing that the way he's viewing the situation really isn't through the lens of conscience at all, because the whole point of the conscience is to be a moral squint. And what Wolsey wants to do is he wants to take church lands or church property to get the Pope to annul the marriage to Catherine. And so, what you notice about Woolsey is his whole view of the situation is it's like utilitarian. If we ask why does he want this, he says the reason is to prevent dynastic war. And so ultimately, if we think back to our prior knowledge, this is a utilitarian argument. Utilitarian argument. He doesn't really care about whether the marriage is in fact legitimate. He doesn't care really about what's right or wrong. He just cares about preventing dynastic war. So he's making this utilitarian argument. He's not really interested, like St. Thomas More is, about what's really right or wrong. And so and he says to Thomas, he says, where did I put it in my notes? Did I have it here? At one point he asks Thomas, More, would you put your own private conscience ahead of your public duty? And Moore's response, let's see, I gotta fix this. Wait, where is that? Sorry. Moore says in response to Woolsey, first he says, just ask the Pope. And he won't support taking church land because it's not their place. And so Moore wants to be a good citizen of the king. He wants to help the king. It's just that he thinks the method that Woolsey wants to use is the wrong method. So he says, why don't, we'll just ask the Pope. And then when Woolsey makes that comment, like, would put your own private conscience before public duty? Thomas More gives that great line. He says, when a statesman, where is it? I have it here somewhere. Forsakes his own private conscience for public duty, let's see. That's it. Oh, I don't have the whole thing. When they forsake their own private conscience for public duty, they send their country by short order into chaos. They send their country by short order into chaos. And so for More, he sees the conscience as important because it's going to keep him doing the right thing. Because if the right thing is the right thing, it shouldn't really, it shouldn't matter if it's a state issue or if it's, his own his personal opinion. For More, it's ordered to what's good. Because so remember, the conscience should be ordered to the good. So if your conscience really is ordered to the good, it shouldn't matter whether it's, your conscience isn't just a personal opinion. It's ordered to what's true and what's good. That's what Father Cuddy meant when he said it's an application of knowledge. What knowledge is it applying? It's not. He's applying the knowledge of what he knows to be true based on the natural law, the moral law, and the laws of the country. So ultimately, what you see in the scene with Thomas More and Woolsey is he's not really interested in what's right or wrong. He just wants to it's like a means to an end. Whereas for Thomas More, his conscience is paramount. He's not going to do anything that's going to violate his conscience. You kind of see like two different approaches to conscience in that scene. So let me see if there were any other notes I had there. Yeah, I think that's good for that one. So let me pause this for a sec. All right. So now let's look at the next question. This question is the scene where he's being interrogated in the Tower by Norfolk, Cromwell, and Archbishop Cranmer. So in this one, you need to explain the relationship between law, freedom, and conscience as covered in the unit, and discuss Thomas' understanding of the use of conscience regarding his refusal to affirm Henry's divorce in the Act of Supremacy and Succession, and provide evidence from the scene. So we'll watch the scene, because this was like last week, so you might not remember it, and then we'll go over it together. So here's the scene. I'll pause that for now. So looking at the different types of freedom, there's freedom of movement, and that's just your ability to move around. So what they do to try to pressure more into supporting the oath of succession is they lock him in jail. So the takeaway is freedom of movement, but he still has the second type of freedom. This is the freedom of choice or will. This is what we usually think of as freedom. No other creature on this earth enjoys this type of freedom. All other creatures are wholly bound by the laws of their natures. What they do is completely determined by their inner physical necessity of their natural instincts and tendencies. Human persons are different, however. Our wills are not bound from within by any physical necessity. That's what we mean when we say we can act freely or voluntarily. So no matter what they do, no matter what pressure they put on him, he still maintains his freedom of conscience. And that's part of where our dignity comes from, and they can't take that from him. And then it says, a third kind of freedom is the ability to freely choose without experiencing the moral restraint of commanding authority. This is freedom from the law we usually call independence. The law binds the free will of human persons by imposing a moral necessity. We experience this kind of freedom as, for example, when Americans want its independence from Britain, or when you become 18, you don't have to follow the rules of your house. So normally, freedom from the law is not necessarily a good thing, but as it says here, as a citizen of a country, or simply as someone living in common with other people, a person is helped by the civil law which governs him if it's a just law. So what we see in St. Thomas More's example is they took his freedom of movement. He still had his freedom of will. And that seems to be what really pisses Henry off. He wants to make him bend the knee. And so More refuses to give up his freedom of will. And why? He's not, he thinks the law will keep him safe because he hasn't broken the law. But what ends up happening is Rich lies. So he ends up being convicted on false testimony. So in terms of freedom from the law, for More, he believes he's free because the law in question is unjust. And the reason it's unjust is because it's not reasonable, because it contradicts the divine law. And we'll look at that more in the next question. So I'll leave, I won't, contradicts. And he says this in the end. He's like, dude, this contradicts the divine law. It also, he said, contradicts the positive law, because he says that it contradicts the Magna Carta and the coronation oath. He also disputes the authority. He says that Parliament doesn't have the authority to make Henry head of the church or annul marriages. It's promulgated, so there's nothing wrong with that. We can also question whether, is this for the common good? Wolsey tried to argue that it is, but if we look at the fact that ultimately, in the end, Moore says that the real problem is that he wouldn't bend the knee, that shows us that it's not for the common good, that this is a personal beef between Henry and him. And Henry wants to take away his freedom of will. And ultimately, he can't do it. And he ends up executing him under a false charge. And so that's where you see how, like, freedom, the law, conscience are all kind of coming into play. So we have a few minutes. So the next question, it takes longer when I type them up. So the next question, we don't have to watch this scene because we just watched it in class. But it says, explain the did I do that one? Oh, right. Oh, we already kind of did this one. So explain the concept of law as covered in the unit. Discuss the law at issue and evaluate whether it meets the criteria of a just law and Thomas's response to the accusation. So we basically did that as I was talking about this other question. So this is the definition of a law, that it's an ordinance of reason promulgated by one in authority for the common good. So if it's a true law, it has to be reasonable, promulgated, and it has to be from the right authority and for the common good. And so this is the law in question. And again, Moore argues at the end that the law in question is not a just law. So for this one, paste. Let me put this down here. So for this one, Moore says it's not a just law because it contradicts the divine law. How does it contradict the divine law? Let's be more specific there. Moore says that if you see it right here, it says the indictment is grounded in an act of Parliament which is repugnant to the law of God. So he says the indictment is grounded in an act, and where am I? In an act of Parliament, which is repugnant. I'll fix the spelling later. To the divine law. So what he's saying there is ultimately it's a contradiction. The indictment contradicts the divine law. He also notes that it contradicts the Magna Carta and the oath of coronation. And so if there's contradictions, it's not reasonable. That's like the definition of one of the like the first rule of logic. Well, actually, I think it's the third rule of logic, actually. But anyway, if there's a contradiction, then it's not reasonable. Again, he says that the Parliament doesn't have the authority, and the specific thing he says there is that Jesus made Peter the head of the church, and that was in Matthew 16, and he says that Parliament doesn't have the authority to change who the head of the church is, because that is divine law that was enacted by Jesus himself, you know. He also you could also mention that the authority to grant a annulment is it's positive law, but it's church law. So it's not the idea that you can't get divorced, that's divine law because that comes from Jesus as well. But the ability to grant annulments would be church law, or ecclesial law, and that's a form of positive law because it's enacted by human beings. But the indissolubility of marriage, again, that would be divine law. So you're getting the types of law here as well. Because that's the teaching of Jesus, and that's in Matthew, I want to say Matthew 6. All right. So those are the grounds upon which Moore disputes the charges against him. And then the last question was just looking at the different types of law. We've kind of already gone over them in the course of this question. So I have a chart here. So the different types of law, you have the physical laws of nature, and you have the moral laws. So moral laws only apply to us because we have reason and free will, so we could choose to follow them. And then you have the human ecclesial laws, so the human church law. So that was something Moore was arguing about. Then you have the positive law. The act of supremacy is an example of positive law. And then you have the divine laws that come from God directly. That would be the indissolubility of marriage and also who's the head of the church. He didn't really appeal to natural law. There was only one point. One second. Remember when Thomas More says to the bishop or the cardinal, he's like, if Parliament said if the king said the world was flat, it wouldn't make it flat. And if he said the world was round, it wouldn't make it round. What he was appealing to there was the natural law, that the natural law is more fundamental than the positive law. In a sense, it's even more fundamental. It's kind of on par with the divine law because it's an expression of the divine law in human reason. But that's an appeal to natural law when he makes that argument. He's saying that, look, even if the positive law of the king says the world is flat, that doesn't make it flat because the working in order of the universe, whether it's the world is flat or round or whatever, that's written into creation by the creator himself. Does that make sense? So those are your options for the test. And yeah, so if you need any help, let me know, but we'll take it next class. Sound good? Thank you.